A different track in 2020. Round 3, the Hungarian Grand Prix. Maybe not an absolute classic, but there was still plenty of drama. And in fact, the drama actually started before we even got to the grid. So Max Verstappen having a tricky weekend in Red Bull, the team in general having a tricky weekend. He qualified 7th, Albon down in 13th, and not happy with the car. He was definitely not happy with the car when it came to the grid, that's for sure, because he hit the wall on the way round in tricky wet conditions. He hit it pretty hard, significant suspension damage on the front left. It looked like he just went in too hot to turn 12, in a bit deep, locked the brakes, then locked the rears on downshifting, round into the wall. But if we actually go on board with him, we can see a better look at what happened. So we come on board with Verstappen through turn 9, and you can see on the exit he's really fighting the car. And these installation laps, really, reconnaissance laps to the grid, they're fairly routine, but actually in these conditions, in the wet, you want to be pushing on. You want to be feeling the limit of the grip, because you're not going to get a real chance on the formation lap at low speed. So Verstappen's leaning on the car quite heavily, actually. He's had some moments out of turn 9. And then we get through turn 10, a little bit more steady through there, 5th gear through turn 11, and now is where the scene of the crash comes. Brakes super late, locks the front straight away, and then pulls the gears quickly downshifting, and then locks the rears, armful of opposite lock in the wall, big contact, the suspension's pointing the wrong way. Bad news. In a normal world, he's out of the race before it even begins. But if we actually rewind on this lap, coming through turn 10 and into turn 11, he's in 5th gear. Now what the drivers have to do, what the cars need, is to sync the gears before the start of the race, really. And this is basically just going at a set level of torque through each of the gears, 1st to 8th, in order to enable quick shift. So the software basically can be able to repeat that for a quick shift. You have to do this once, whenever the ignition's on. And Verstappen, when he gets to the grid, whenever the cars come to the grid, you don't turn the car fully off, the ignition in, completely killing the car. You turn it just so the engine's off. So you don't need to relearn the gears. And normally it wouldn't be a problem, because tracks like Austria, Silverstone next up, even Barcelona, the back straight, you've always got a straight that's long enough to get up to 8th gear, and it's not a problem. Here in Budapest, much harder. The straights are not very long in the first place. We actually heard Verstappen in one of the practice sessions saying he struggled to learn 8th gear. If you don't learn it, it's not a big deal, but what it would mean is end of lap 1, when he's coming in a slipstream or defending, attacking, he would then have a slow shift from 7th to 8th, and it might cost him 1 or 2 tenths. So it's nitpicking, and I would suggest many other drivers didn't learn 8th gear in these slippery, wet conditions. I imagine no one else did, because quite frankly, in the dry conditions, it's difficult around this track. But in the wet, pretty much impossible, as we're about to find out. So we get to the exit of the corner, and listen to the upshifts here. From 5th, really quick short shifts, because he's desperate to get into 8th gear and then put enough power and therefore torque to learn that 8th gear, to get the gear sync. So when he does it, he tries to hold it in 8th gear for just a little bit of time. Then he hits the brakes, and wow, it's just so late on the brakes. He's kind of braking at not far from a dry braking point, and that's why he sends it off the track into the wall at some speed. I don't think he's necessarily just pushing the brakes. I think it's all about trying to learn this gear, and he's ended up carrying way more speed than he would for these conditions into that corner, and that's why he's hit the wall. Doesn't change the fact it's a really sloppy moment. You can't be hitting the wall like that on the way to the grid. Verstappen at this point, suspension clearly bent. It looked for all the world like he was going to miss out as well. But I have to say, absolutely phenomenal job from the mechanics at Red Bull. Never thought it would happen. Obviously, Mercedes probably told Lewis Hamilton it wouldn't happen as well, because Hamilton was told basically Verstappen won't be starting.
Gap to Verstappen at 9.2. He reports that he's managing.
I thought you said Verstappen's out.
They managed to get that car sorted on the grid.
The Red Bull mechanics, absolute hats off to them. They got it turned around with about 30 seconds to spare. They got the left front on, so he didn't incur a penalty either. It was a great job. There were more pre-start dramas though. Verstappen's car was fixed and he was able to start the race. But as the formation lap started, it became clear the track was actually really dry. And there's a 30-minute window pretty much where the drivers have just been on the grid doing the national anthem, their final pre-race checks, whatever else. And you don't get to see the track. And the track, of course, is drying. It was reasonably warm conditions. And as soon as they get back out there, they realised, hang on, this is probably slick tyres now. And there were a few drivers that thought it. The two drivers that pitted were the Haas drivers, and they came into the pits. Kevin Magnussen, for some reason, was already on the full wet tyre. I think that was just a pure mistake from the team. That would have been a shocker. But he pitted for slicks. Grosjean behind him pitted for slicks as well. And ultimately, it was the right thing to do. The track clearly was dry enough to take the slicks. And in these conditions, the sooner you can get on to dry tyres, slick tyres, the better you are, because they just come up to temperature quickly and they're far quicker, basically. So for every lap that a driver on intermediate tyres is continuing, they're just going to lose time in the overall race. And that really played out with Magnussen flying up the order, Grosjean just behind him, and they were running really, really well inside the top 5 for the first part of the race. The big problem really came after the race for Haas, because they broke the rule that says the driver must drive unaided for the formation lap. Now, this happened because he was called into the pits by his team, both Grosjean and Magnussen. There was a bit of a conflab between race engineers, drivers, should they pit, shouldn't they pit, and in the end they were told to pit.
Okay, Kevin, I think we'll box now. Box now.
Yeah, I agree. For dry, yeah? For dry. Box now for dry.
Yeah, we're boxing for dry.
Box for dry. Box for dry.
This was deemed as aiding the driver. You could see why. No one else pitted. Daniel Kvyat was on the radio for AlphaTauri saying, we need to pit. He also had not much to lose. He qualified poorly on Saturday, but he didn't pit because he didn't hear back from his team. For Haas, they did pit. They broke that rule, which incurred a 10-second penalty. Still works for them. Magnussen still gets a point, and I don't think he would have got that point without. It's a strange rule, really. I don't know exactly why it's there. It feels like it's outdated, that rule. Mainly in these conditions, really, it can happen. We had a race in China in 2017 where Carlos Sainz actually started the race in a Toro Rosso on slicks, and I was starting from pretty much the back in a Renault, and I had exactly the same situation.
Looks pretty dry. Let's box for super soft, I think.
Okay, Joe, if you want to come in, you can come in.
Yeah,
please let me know.
Okay, let's box.
Okay, box.
It's a bit of a risk, but for that day for me, it paid off, at least in the short term. And for Haas, if they hadn't have radioed, if they had have just said, we're coming in, then they would have avoided that 10-second penalty as well. The pre-race drama is not quite finished yet. From the front of the grid to the back of the grid, and Kimi Raikkonen does pick up a penalty. Let's have a look at why that's the case for the Alfa Romeo driver. On board with him, coming up to the grid, you've got his teammate Antonio Giovinazzi ahead. Raikkonen doing his burnouts up to the grid as per usual. The problem for him is 2 Haas drivers starting 16th and 18th are now in the pits. So Raikkonen now needs to leave 2 grid boxes completely empty on his side, and basically he gets a bit confused momentarily, and the natural thing is to go to the grid box that's ahead, and that's what you normally think of. He's missed the fact that those 2 guys have pitted, and you can see he realises very late in the day that he's about to overshoot, and he's fully locked up the front tyres over the grid box, has a little stretch out to sea, damn it, over the box. He's going to get a penalty. Sloppy one for the most experienced man on the grid, but pretty much a slam dunk there. He started kind of alongside his teammate Giovinazzi at the back of the grid. And that was all just before the race began. So much more action during the race. Perez's massive moment, Albon's charge through the field, lots more midfield battles as well. Find it all on F1 TV.